glad you're here. But this prompted me to further contemplate what relationship the Olympics should have, if any, with what is going on in churches across the land, even this morning. And as some of you Olympian scholars may be aware, the Olympics, which by some accounts go as far back as 776 BC, nearly 3,000 years, they are not completely, that is, the Olympics are not completely divorced from religion. In fact, one might well argue they were born of religious consciousness. While not fact, a well-established myth sustained through the centuries was that the Greek hero Heracles, who was the son of Zeus, we all know them, don't we? You know, the guy in charge of sky and thunder in that famous Mount Olympus. They used to have him on cartoons. The guy that initiated all of this. According to Greek mythology, Heracles measured out what is the basis of our modern notion of a stadium in 200 steps, thereby setting up the scenario for games to be held every 4 years, in which athletic competitions of all sorts, including those which involve horse and chariot racing. The superlative performances presumably were to be pleasing to Zeus. Oh yes, amidst this Greek mythological religious context, there were also religious sacrifices along the sidelines. Is that what's going on in Sochi? I don't think so. Over several hundred years, though, as the Romans came to dominate Greece, the Olympic movement was pretty much crushed against the Roman appetite for grueling spectacles and the whims of the presiding emperors of the time, including Theodosius I, who abolished the games way back in 393 AD. Olympic competitions, nonetheless, re-emerged in the 17th century, minus the component of pleasing the gods and making religious sacrifices. Today's Olympics, in that sense, are a little different than the originals on Mount Olympus. Aiming for top performance, doing the best one can do at a particular thing or group of things. Indeed, anyone who has witnessed even only a small snippet of some of the competitions over the past couple of weeks can readily appreciate that old ABC television program, dramatic intro to their program called Wide World of Sports. Some years ago, in the words of that commentator Jim McKay, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Am I the only guy that remembers that phrase? Clearly, it would seem that utterly committed competitors would be fated for one category or the other. It is a crowning human experience, surely, for an individual, and perhaps even for a nation, like Canada this morning, to see one of their own through to victory, or at least a profoundly good performance, even though they might not get to the podium. The notion of owning the podium seems a bit obnoxious to me. But as many interviews of athletes reveal, there is a sense in which it would seem that simply making the Olympic team is something of a very significant win in itself. It takes enormous dedication, skill, and it would seem something more to get there. Now, is that something more perhaps in line with what the originators of the first Olympic spectacles first had in mind? Perhaps something spiritual. Indeed, television commentators and others use the phrase Olympic spirit, like everyone knows exactly what that's about. Maybe the religious component of the Olympics isn't as dead as most of us might think. The 33-year-old famous movie Chariots of Fire really brought to the fore the re-emergence of a religious aspect of the Olympic Games when retelling the true story of a Scottish Christian runner who raced as he put it, for the glory of God, and his no less talented Jewish competitor who contended with the anti-Semitism of the Olympics of 1924. The superlative achievements, like those we witness on our televisions today, are not unrelated to the underlying spirit of all those involved. And as we have witnessed over the years, those that cheat, the Olympian sinners, we might call them, they are judged harshly, as worse than if they hadn't entered the competition at all, something of anti-Olympians. They not only miss the point of the whole thing, but also stand against truth itself. Indeed, there is a spirit in the true Olympics of openly doing the best one can and dealing with the reality of abilities or lack thereof as one honestly puts oneself on the line for the national team. Something tells me that a competitor equipped with this something more than just the best trainers and the most enriching diets and the gift of a wonderful body capable of rising to the challenge of the game, and after all, it is just a game, we should remember that. Something tells me that the little something more, that spirit that helps one dig for a strength that is deeper, that spirit that endures a little longer, aims a little more accurately, and believes in what is possible, even when everyone else would think it's impossible, someone with that has not just a little something extra, they have something that is at the core of what it's all about. But that is not just true of the Olympics and Olympians, but it is true of all of us, even through the course of our everyday lives. We are not talking about luck here, nor just sport. We're talking about something much deeper and more valuable than these. Today we heard read a segment of the so-called priestly code in the book of Leviticus, which is in effect a repeat of a portion of the so-called Decalogue, or 10 Commandments. The laws to live by as delivered by Moses and inspired by God himself. Why do people need such rules? Well, like Olympic athletes, people don't just fall into healthy spiritual lives. They need to discipline their lives to achieve them. Of course, what's critical here is that they understand that they have a spiritual life to begin with. They are more than just physical disciples. That is perhaps where the modern world has been most challenging to the Christian, Jewish, and other lives of faith. Similar to the Roman erasure of the Greek Olympian spirit, modern culture tends to underrate and even try to make as nothing what is the essence of human existence, as each of us strives to discover our being in relation to one greater than ourselves, God. That divine existence that bears no trivial relationship to us. From the Christian point of view, that means spending time contemplating what that relationship is about and who we are as beings created by God. To ignore the signposts of divine existence is something like the slalom skier just smashing through the poles as they make their way down the hill. They may get to the bottom of the hill, but they've totally lost the game now, haven't they? The best in life is to be appreciated as we abide by the poles of discipline afforded to us in divine commandments, and as we are drawn by the Spirit pulling us through to a creative victory. A victory we believe in and have already witnessed being achieved. This isn't about some mythological or made-up story. It is about a real man who offered us a real example of teaching and discipline and spirit, not just as it was spoken, but as it was lived in Jesus Christ. Indeed, Does Jesus sound any different than the best of the Olympians' coaches? He calls upon you and I to do more than the others, to be more righteous, to be more loving, to be more welcoming, kinder, to be more generous. He says, as we heard from our earlier gospel reading from chapter 5 of Matthew, be perfect. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. A tall order, to be sure, but is that not a sentiment that is close to what every coach offers each of their team as they go out the starting gates, down the hill, or wherever they're headed out on their particular competition? Be as perfect as you can be. Give a divine performance. That is what Jesus Christ inspires each of us to provide, not just in games every 4 years, but through the whole course of our lives. Now that may sound demanding, but it's worth it. Now I guess we can take this Olympic analogy too far, and probably shouldn't, for after all, life isn't just a game or a series of games, now is it? And we aren't continually under the stress of a competition. Life is a gift not to be spent totally taken up with just amusements, but filled with meaning and accomplishments and relationships. Relationships. That's where humanity really gets all tied up in knots. Much as we feel like we may be competing just to stay alive at times, we need to be no less conscious of the gift of that invisible but powerful spirit that we relate to, that is within us and sustains us through all things. That ruach, as the Hebrew word aptly names the Spirit, as close as the wind on our face and the breathing into our lungs of air. Every Olympic competitor knows how important the breathing is. That intimate reality of the Christian life within us that is like nothing less or closer than our awareness of being loved and loving others. The most powerful and profoundly victorious force in the world. In the closing chapter of his book, aptly named Is God Happy?, the late Polish philosopher Leszek Kolakowski wrote, "The life of our culture is intense, interesting, and vigorous. What then are the reasons for our pessimism and gloom, our feeling of chaos and sense of unease? The churches say it's because you've forgotten God. But it's far from clear which is the cause here and which is the effect. You have forgotten God, they say, because God is constraining and inconvenient, because he imposes duties you consider too heavy, although in reality they are not too hard to bear. Not at all, we might reply. God is not inconvenient. On the contrary, he endows us with serenity and certainty. Thanks to him, we can believe that the world has meaning and is essentially good, even though experience might suggest otherwise." This from his creatively titled chapter, Our Merry Apocalypse. I don't think those of us here today are forgetting God, nor even perhaps most people at home still fixed to their TVs. What's the next event after the hockey? Oh, that's it? Oh, gee. I won't keep it.
Okay, we take that then.
Well, most of us may not forget God. We might well ask whether or not God is happy with our performance and maybe the performance of the people in Sochi, with not just what we are doing individually, but together as a team, as a community, as a world. Perhaps one of the most interesting phenomena about the Olympics is the degree to which it pulls us together, as different as we are. and the implicit suggestion that in spite of our differences, there is something fundamental that we all share in common, including a potential concern for one another, like that Norwegian fellow who offered the Canadian a new ski after his ski broke. I think that was last year, if I remember right. And was that this year? And the Canadians went on, it shows you how out of touch I am. And then the Canadian went on to win against the Norwegian. The Olympics seem to inspire a widespread and profoundly good feeling with virtually every nation on earth participating. I heard a comment made by Prince Philip, which I would tend to agree with, and that was in relation to nations who saw their athletes not winning, that they would call inquiries after the Olympics. And he thought it was appalling that they would call inquiries after the Olympics into why they were not winning. We live in a world where nationhood would seem to be moving towards meaning less and less. Historically, patriotism has seemed to be a very powerful force. Sure, it still may be gratifying to see citizens of one's own country on the podium, but a deeper, more lasting, and more powerful driving force is the one that pulls us all together, whether in the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. Jesus Christ realized them both and everything in between. Whether amidst the challenges of Olympic life or those of our sometimes relatively mundane, but not always so routine lives. In it all, we might well ask ourselves, how can we make God happy with our performance? Jesus Christ gives us not just a few clues. This, if we follow them, may totally change the way we do things and also what we achieve. Indeed, we should celebrate our victory in the hockey game this morning. Amen.